We try to answer another £1,000,000 question, but because there's inflation, let's make 1,000,000 rubles. Who's in charge in Russia? I really mean who's in charge. Clearly, with today's video we do not intend to deny that the Russian president has broad powers, but given that in the traditional media and the management of political power in Russia is trivially simplified, like Putin, well, I would say for a moment to clarify. So the Russian regime is authoritarian. This, however, does not exclude the existence of other important centers of power with respect to the top figure. That they can exert some influence on the most important political and military decisions. Without wishing to force somewhat distorted comparisons, it is enough to recall that even in the Third Reich, a totalitarian system par excellence, such centers existed, let alone in contemporary Russia. We're not here to draw any kind of parallels between historical figures. I say something just to reinforce my argument with a historical comparison. The same applies to the Russian Federation. We obviously perceive the figure of the top. When you think of a country, you think of the figure of the prime minister, the figure of the president, of what the current legal system is. What we have tried to do is to collect, as always, sources and documents from organizations and analysts of different orientations, leaving it to you to inform yourselves freely. Acknowledging the existence of other centers of power does not mean seeking justifications or extenuating circumstances for the political decisions of the summit, but only demonstrating that even an autocratic power encounters limits even when this seems to us to be the opposite of all logic. Going back in time to March 2000, when Russia, Ukraine had not yet become fashionable to talk about it. Having become full-fledged president after the elections, Putin has turned out to be anything but a symbolic figure or a puppet. Putin immediately turned out to be practically a free hitter. Translated, someone who doesn't give a damn about other people's opinions. One of the first moves was the summoning to the Kremlin of the so-called oligarchs, mostly former men of the apparatus who had become rich thanks to the privatizations of the 1990s. For those who want to get an idea of names and heritages, there is a ranking compiled by Forbes in 2021. As we know, Putin imposed very clear conditions on the oligarchs: you don't get involved in politics and I leave you your wealth. Putin also proved himself to be so in international affairs. If there is one field in which Putin has spent all his energy, it is the international role of his country without ever making a secret of his desire to give it back a plan of power lost in the 90s. There have been many facts and decisions that have been included in this plan. Think of Russia's economic renaissance, which is mainly focused on energy resources. I don't know, do you remember the 90s in Russia, the years of lead? Think of the double-dealing partnership with China, the renewed relations with countries that were already members of the Soviet Union such as Kazakhstan. But evidently, as we said at the beginning, it is unthinkable that only a single man, however shrewd, intelligent as even the greatest critics acknowledge, can carry alone the weight of power of a great power, perhaps more military than economic, which also presents important critical issues such as demographics, between declining birth rates and increasing average age. The inefficiency of the civil-military apparatus, the unequal distribution of wealth with the almost total elimination of the middle class, the enormous disparities between town and country, the brain drain. However, it would not even be entirely correct to speak of a real sharing of power. That is, if those who have aligned themselves with the new course have retained power, wealth, those who have not complied have suffered severe setbacks. This is the case with Boris Berezovsky or Michael Kowalski, respectively tycoons in the television and commodity sectors. That we have seen investigations, trials and arrests rained down on them. Expropriations, finally, from exile in London, Kowalski would have continued to launch accusations for Putin when the invasion of Ukraine. Clearly, if Putin shows zero tolerance towards those once trusted men who dared to challenge him, let alone with the journalists who have been fighting for years to denounce its shady actions, this control, with the consequences that we can imagine, unfortunately, is an everyday reality. And it happens everywhere. Think, for example, when on the occasion of the Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, articles and photos of a single protest banner hanging from an overpass disappeared from all Chinese national websites and social networks. The internet allows various journalists and activists to carry out news and updates across borders, but believe that this happens in complete anonymity and above all in secret. It is a big mistake that comes at a high price. In practice, Putin has eliminated, not necessarily in a literal sense, dissonant voices, transferring assets and power into trusted hands. Its power, consolidated especially from 2014 onwards, was somewhat supported by the constitutional referendum of 2020, which has tried by a large majority to expand presidential powers, abolishing the mandate ceiling and giving the green light to the ban on same-sex marriages. Farewell. We will never know the real result of this referendum. However, we can assume that a very substantial part of readers he voted for him, some because he sees in him the one who brought Russia back to the world, some because he does not see credible successes, some because he is convinced of the perfect uselessness of a vote against. What there is that those who have come to terms with Putin have made their fortunes. Regarding the decision to unleash the conflict in Ukraine and its conduct, however, some cracks have become apparent here. They range from those who claim that Putin was misinformed by the military and intelligence services, which would explain a number of wrong decisions, and of strategic mistakes, up to the position expressed by the British The Guardian, which in an article described Putin as a president with full powers on the ground, who made all decisions in place of ministers and generals, including Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of State Valery Gerasimov, the custodians, in short, of the famous nuclear codes. Collecting these constructions, therefore, the figure of a leader would seem to emerge, absolute master both in the political and military spheres. But in all honesty, such a prospect raises some perplexity. Of course, however extensive the prerogatives of the head of state may be, Putin is supported in the exercise of power by men and women, largely chosen by him from intelligence circles. Different from which, with a curriculum of studies in the West, let's see some names. Let's start with the so-called oligarchs and the like, personalities from the world of politics and state business, all the owners of large personal assets. Maybe if they were Americans, we'd call them philanthropists. But let's leave the puns alone. Nikolai is the owner of the state-owned company Transneft, the one that manages oil and gas pipelines and in some ways the transporter of Russia's very important energy resources. And remember, where there is money there is power. Panarin is considered the weaver of the Russian-China partnership. Sergei Chemezov, the CEO of another important public holding company, the same one founded by Putin himself in 2007 that deals with defense and high-tech. Some sources estimate Putin's fortune, but they cannot be verified, at about $200 billion. The brothers Boris and Arkady Rosenberg, entrepreneurs in the gas sector, and to stay with gas we cannot forget the former Chovich Miller, father owner of Gazprom, the powerful state-owned company in the sector, with interests ranging in many other areas. It is obvious that the oligarchs owe Putin a lot. It is a system of power in some way that goes in two directions. In other words, they respect Putin's political priority and Putin respects their economic interests. On the strictly political side, instead, we find Sergei Lavrov, Foreign Minister, Peskov, Putin's official spokesman Leonid Slutsky, chairman of the Duma's Foreign Affairs Committee. There is also no shortage of communication experts, the most important role in such a setup, such as journalist Vladimir Soloviev, a sort of minister of propaganda, Margarita Simonyan, director of Russia Today, and Maria Zakharova, spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is considered in 2016 among the 100 most influential women in the world. Now, if someone were to ask what power and influence these characters have, perhaps the answer closest to the truth, obviously with all the necessary precautions, to be personalities closely linked to Putin, who in many cases owe him privileges and well-being. A boundary between friendship and servility may be what transpires on the outside, but of which it is only an important cog in a larger oligarchy, this one very narrow in the true sense of the word, within which the logic of compromise cannot be said to be completely alien, more than a single man in command. Putin has turned out to be a skillful mediator of often conflicting interests coming from the military political establishment, from the economic potentates and from the very secret services in which he himself was trained, which he has been able to employ more and more in order to subject the judiciary to the will of the executive. Another component of this very small elite that over the years has taken on increasing importance is represented by the staff that assists the federal president, in practice a set of experts and civil and military officials who support and encourage Putin's political project, inspired by an ever-present and fervent patriotism. In practice, it is a complex, bureaucratic politics, at the same time made up of propaganda, instrumentalization of the values of the past, limitation of dissent in which the presidential staff finds itself mediating between the different souls, thus ensuring the perpetuation of the power that is symbolically embodied by Putin. Putin, therefore, seems only the top of this hierarchy of power. To confirm that Putin is not a single man in charge would be Pavlovsky himself, former presidential advisor to those who still live in Moscow, according to whom it is not only Putin who is in command of the Russian state, but the entire economic, financial and military apparatus. The idea that one man, no matter how great his personality and influence may be, would never be able to single-handedly rule a country that is the largest in the world. If you are interested in this content and want me to make more videos this support channel, leave a like and subscribe. See you soon.